All right, I think we got enough people to get started, so let's go ahead and call this board meeting to order. It is 5 o'clock on October 27th. I'd like to welcome you all. My name is Sean Eystone. I'd like to introduce some of the folks on this call. We have directors Clausen, Easton, Etsy, Godwin, Malone, and Williams, Superintendent Matt Degner, and Recording Secretary Kim Colvin, and a whole host of other folks. As a reminder, we will not be responding in real time to the Q&A or chat portions, but we do have an opportunity at the beginning of our meeting for community comment. If you would like to speak during community comment, you'd have to use the raise hand feature, and I will call on you, and Kim will give you the rights to speak, and you will have 4 minutes to do so. With that, it is the time for community comment. So if there is anyone interested in speaking, please use the raise hand feature now. Going once, going twice. Okay, we will move on to the next agenda item, which is approval of tonight's agenda. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve tonight's agenda.
Second.
All right, Kim, ready to vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, and we move into our consent agenda. Is there any questions on the bills or any comments on the bills that folks would like to make?
I only had one question, I think, and it was regarding the expense for the return book drop off for Southeast. And after I got my answer, it made sense when I read the description again. So thank you for that.
I had one brief question on a couple charges, and my assumption was correct that they're asbestos related charges, which while it's a facilities thing, it's a general fund expenditure that we ask the SBRC for reimbursement on that. Anything else from any other directors?
And Sean, I'd just like to comment that I was happy to see item number 8, a contract for Dr. Parker to do professional development in the district.
Are there any items from the consent that directors would like to pull? If not, I would entertain a motion.
I move that we approve tonight's consent agenda.
Second.
Second.
All right. There's no further comments. Kim, I think we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, we can move down to our discussion items. One thing, the first one up is voluntary transfers. Is something that we've been getting ready to talk about for a while now. So I don't know who I'm turning over to. Matt, maybe you're starting and passing it off.
Yep. Thanks, Sean. Good evening, everyone. Yes, transfers we've talked about a couple different times. So we're going to kind of dust off that conversation here and revisit the topic. A couple of historical things. If you remember, for a significant period of time, our secondary campuses were closed to transfers, really based on kind of space in our secondary buildings. And so as we've worked through the facility master plan and increased space throughout those secondary buildings, the district had moved to open up those transfers. Liberty has operated with a different set of rules surrounding transfers and open enrollments in. And so probably 2 key terms just to make sure we keep straight are transfers are those that are in the district. And then when we talk open enroll, those are for students leaving or entering the district. And so Scott is going to walk you through some of the secondary data and the admin team's recommendation about moving forward on how we handle and process secondary transfers. And then Amy's going to talk a little bit about the elementary transfers. And if you remember there, we've really kind of moved the other direction and really work to kind of slow down the amount of transfers we've had and keep some integrity to the boundaries, except for those equity balance components. And so she'll revisit some of that conversation with you as well and talk about a couple minor changes there. So first we'll have Scott lead her off and walk you through, and then of course we'll take any questions you might have so we can figure out our next steps to move forward in our process.
Thank you, Matt. Kim, do I have the ability to share my screen? All right, thank you, directors. This first one is what Matt was just alluding to, that as an AD and as a principal, often had a lot of opportunities to educate folks about the terminology around going to school, where you go to school. So an open enrollment is a transfer between districts. So if a kiddo wanted to go from Clear Creek, Amana to the Iowa City schools, we'd say that's an open enrollment. And voluntary transfers are those transfers between in-district buildings. So if a kiddo wants to go from Southeast Junior High to Northwest Junior High, that's an voluntary transfer or an in-district transfer. Anytime we use those terms, anytime a kid wants to attend a school not of their residence. So if a family moves, then that's not considered a transfer, right? And some people might say, well, I transferred from Cedar Rapids, Washington to Liberty, but if their family's moved, it's not a transfer in our lingo. So just kind of get around some of the language that we use. I've linked for you here, and we don't have to hit it, but the voluntary transfer form is here if you wish, and that is unchanged. Our March 1 deadline we'd like to keep, and that's simply so that when we get that information from families, whether it's open enrollment or voluntary transfers, we can continue to staff the buildings with that information. If we get transfers after that date, it gets problematic in terms of staffing our building. And then here as well, this is a link that's linked right to our website that just kind of has the rules around transfers. And again, I don't feel like I have to click on it, but these are available to you if you wish to do that. Matt already alluded to this. Voluntary transfers, again, we're talking about that in-district piece, has been wide open between all secondary schools with one exception, and that has been Liberty has been closed. And then I wanted to highlight two other sections that I'm sure Matt will want to talk about here in a little bit. If a family was attending West High and moves to City High, physically moves, you can stay at your school that you were previously at. So you could say, hey, I know I live in the City High attendance area now. I want to continue to be at West High. Well, we would make families fill out the voluntary transfer form in that scenario because kids aren't attending the school of their residence, right? But we absolutely let families do that. And then the other piece is that there are some kids that have gotten into Liberty for good cause, and good cause are just kind of appeals to the central office team. Most of those are medical in nature. So I did want to make sure that I shared that, because when I share the data, you will see that there are some voluntary transfers into Liberty, and you're going to say, well, how could that happen if they're closed? Well, it could be kids that were at Liberty and moved out, or it could be good cause situations. All right, before I hit this, I'm going to share this data with you. I want to make sure that I hit these 2 points, and then I can show that in the data as well. So for 2021, we have less than 100 high school kids that have transferred from one building to another. And of our 4,500 high school kids, that's 100 kids is about 2% of our population. So sometimes I get asked about the scale of how much transfers occurs. That's one piece of it. And then the second bullet is that transfers from 1920 to 2021 are down significantly, not quite 50%. And I think that doesn't surprise me, is as Liberty is firmer in existence, the system is more stable around that, and there are a lot less transfers. So let's click on this data and we can spend some time, and then I'll stop jabbering and give you a chance to ask me about it. Let's see if I can blow this up so that you can see this a little better. So this is 2-year data. And so the junior high's up here on the top. So let me help you read this. This is from Northwest to North Central, 7 kids voluntary transferred in 1920. In 2021, from Northwest to North Central, 6 kiddos. If you go up here to my point about how there are fewer transfers, here's at North Central. North Central 1920 into Northwest, 57, down to 35. And so then the summary data over here, this is the out of North Central. This is the into North Central over 2 years. And so North Central is down 85 kids over 2 years. Those 85 kids are 52 in 1920 and 33 in 2021. So you see less movement from 1920 to 2021, and you see less movement from Northwest. And then Southeast has very little movement in general, but they broke even. Let's go to the high schools down here. We'll hit the same thing. From City to Liberty, 2 kids in 1920, 5 this year. To West, 69 2 years ago. And this year, just 22. So again, that scale is down. From West to City, 19, up a little bit to 21. Look at this though. In 1920, from West, 36 kids into Liberty, only 5 this past year. So again, here's your net up and down. And here is how it breaks out. So City High was down 49 over the 2 years, 48 in 1920, and just net down 1 for this particular school year. So I'm going to stop jabbering. I'm the math geek, right? So I'm throwing a lot of data at you and it just comes natural to me, but I know it doesn't always come natural to others. So I'm happy to breathe and give you a chance to ask me questions, and then I'll finish the presentation later.
Hey, Scott, I have one fairly short question and then one comment. The short question is, when you said if a family moves and the student's allowed to stay at their, say, their original high school, is that just for the remainder of the year or the rest of their high school career?
They can stay for the rest of their high school career, and they would be counted in this voluntary transfer number.
Okay. And then I'm wondering about just the counts being a little bit down for 2021 because we've got a fair number of students in the online program. And so they're probably just staying registered with their home school because they're not actually in a school. Is that a?
It's
That's not my
possible,
comment.
Sean. I don't know how I can capture that, but I can tell you that the data needed to be in by March 1st. And we didn't go to the voluntary learning until March 13th, I believe. Now, it doesn't mean that there could be some extenuating circumstances beyond March 1st, but the vast majority of these voluntary transfers should have occurred before that.
Okay, thanks for that.
Other questions? Trying to have good teacher wait time. All right, well then I'll wrap up. Let me hit this piece. I often get asked questions about how this affects athletic eligibility. It doesn't affect it at all at the junior high, so I'll just focus on the high school piece of this. And I lost track of my years. I want to say it was 3 years ago that Steve and Matt led our team in adopting the state rules. So when I say the state rules, that's not the Department of Ed, that's the Iowa Girls High School Athletic Union and the Iowa High School Athletic Association. So that's the people that manage the boys and the girls sports, which in Iowa is 2 different programs. So a reminder, any bona fide change of residence, you're immediately eligible. You move from Liberty to West High, you're immediately eligible at West High. Now remember, if you chose to move from Liberty to West High, you could stay at Liberty. You're still eligible at Liberty. We would just simply ask you to have a voluntary transfer form. So again, bona fide, your family picks up all their belongings and moves. You move as a family unit, everybody's eligible. Transfers that occur between their 8th and 9th grade year, they're also immediately eligible. This is true of the state as well, that if you move from Solon to to South or to City High, you'd be immediately eligible if that happens between the 8th and 9th grade year. There's one exception to that. And it is sort of you as a kiddo make your commitment if you participate in summer activities. So if you say, I'm going to be an 8th grade baseball player at Liberty, and we allow 8th graders between their 8th and 9th grade years to participate in baseball and softball, then you've made your choice that Liberty is your school. So you're allowed to do this between 8th and 9th grade year, but you might have to decide a little bit sooner if you're going to start baseball or softball in the month of May. Students that move to our district from outside the district may voluntary transfer prior to entering one of our buildings, and they're immediately eligible. Let me make sure that I say this very well. So you're a West Branch family and you move into the City High attendance area, but you say you want to attend West High. You may. That'd be a voluntary transfer because you're not attending the school of your residence, but we do allow you to be eligible on that first entrance into the district. And then finally, students transferring after the start of their freshman year, they follow the state rule, and that is that they're ineligible from varsity sports for 90 school days from the date of the move. 90 school days is essentially a half a year. So we literally do have to count on our fingers and toes, and kids are not eligible to play varsity sports. This is sort of the anti-recruiting rule. I do want to make comment here at the very last line. It does not mean that kids cannot participate in school sports. They just have to participate at their grade level teams. So that's more problematic if you're 11th or 12th grade kiddo, right? You can't play varsity and now you've got to play JV. But if you move in the middle of your 9th grade year, you play 9th grade sports, and then you just keep moving up through the levels as you're done. I think that's the end of mine. Yes, it's to Amy, but maybe before I hand it off to Amy, any further questions for me on transfers?
I have one quick question. Do we keep data regarding the socioeconomical status of those that's transferring?
No, Ruthina, I don't think we've really broken it down that way. That's probably an analysis we could go get, but I think that brings up an interesting point. And sorry, Scott, if you were going to jump in and say this, but I think one of our factors for you to consider here, and really our recommendation would be to treat all of our schools the same and open up the transfers between, because I believe what happens at Liberty, if you go back to those numbers and what we've seen in practice, is that those of means, or those that can navigate the system, oftentimes do and are able to maybe more adequately access healthcare to get a note that would qualify them for that health exception to get into Liberty. And so we've kind of put another structural barrier in place for families that may want to choose that option to attend Liberty. And so with that kind of separate set of rules, that I think the spirit, at the time the board made that decision, when that board considered that question, was in good spirits around being concerned about capacity limits and how many students Liberty could hold, and knowing it was brand new, created another layer that families would have to go through to access that campus. And so we do think that's an equity concern when we look at that for families to do that, we'd be asking them to take another step to go get that note from their doctor to be able to access that campus. And so I'm not sure we've ever broken it down or presented it to you that way. That's something we could take back and look at. I think it would be comparing the names of the applications probably to some FRL status and some of our other demographic factors to do that. Sometimes the ends are really small, as you saw in Scott's chart, so it'd be hard to potentially report that back. But we could look at that a little bit further, Ruthina, but I did think that's another concern to consider. And then also a recommendation that we would really move towards a process and rules that would treat all those secondary campuses the same.
Thank you.
I think, Matt, the only other thing that I was going to say that I didn't say on an earlier slide, and I just spaced it off. So when we've talked about Liberty being closed to in-district transfers, we've also closed it to open enrollment. We haven't been able to say, well, how could we let people from outside the district attend Liberty when we're not even letting people from inside the district? And so we have blocked people that are willing to open enroll and their dollars that go with the kiddos. from going to Liberty. How many? I don't know, but I know that we have. So that would just be another layer to that. So I'm going to stop jabbering. I'm going to mute myself. And Amy, it's yours.
Thank you, Scott. Good evening, everyone. Knowing that Scott was going to talk about secondary transfers tonight, I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity just to share a few thoughts around elementary transfers. And just to provide a little bit of background, in 1819, when we all went to the work of looking at the attendance zones at the elementary level, one key component in that work was to take a look at our voluntary transfer policy. And prior to that time, our voluntary transfers had been wide open and they were granted as long as there was space available in our buildings. And those transfers were looked at in the month of August. But because of all the work that was happening, there was rightfully so wishes to keep the voluntary transfer process locked a lot more down at the elementary level. And so we went forward and restricted that, but for a few exceptions. And that new policy was in effect for 1920, and all the attendance zone changes, as you're well aware, took place last year. We've been using that form then for 2 years now, but as we've utilized that form, and as I was trying to make adjustments for next year's form, there's a couple of things that have cropped up that I think are well worth our time to pay attention to. And one natural thing that I did include in this slide here is that there is one of our exceptions that is falling off as of next year. There was a group of students that had been grandfathered in years ago to their exception through 6th grade. And so that one is naturally falling off for this coming year. The other one that kind of surfaced and we really had to take a look at, and it makes a lot of sense, I think, to think about how we're approaching the equity balance exception differently, is that one on the form for the last 2 years has read that we would allow for that equity balance exception to take place, but we'd review it in August and it would be based on space available. Well, the more we've lived with that, the less sense it has made to wait until August to do it based on space available. If we're serious about equity and we're serious about trying to bring our demographics closer to that midline, why wouldn't we accept it, make space for it, and do it right away in March when we saw those requests come in? So that's the one change I'd like to make there. The other thing I think has been a little bit confusing over time is the good cause exception. And we've included that there a little bit as a kind of a catch-all and tried to mimic what we see in the language for open enrollment. In open enrollment, really the two exceptions that sit there, if you look at the open enrollment forms, are truly around pervasive harassment for the most part, and a health and safety concern. And so I tried to work with Lisa and Scott to make that good cause exception be a little bit more clear there, that really those are the circumstances that we'd be looking at under that exception. So with that, I'd take any questions you have, concerns or comments.
Lots of stunned silence there. That must mean you did a good job, Amy. And Scott. Okay, so if there's not questions, I think we need to kind of know what next steps are. I think with the elementary, right, we kind of knew that we were going to reevaluate, where the schools fell on the line and the over and under kind of deal. But at some point, I believe we're going to have to take board action on the secondary piece. Is that something we want to, immediately take up at the next meeting? Or do we need to have more discussion on it? Kind of looking at board members to get their thoughts on that.
I'm fine if we want to take it up. I just want to make sure that there's enough time for people in the community to know that if we're taking action at the next meeting, to have people share their thoughts or be able, because maybe it's something we're not seeing that other people may see, but it's not just secondary. Going to Amy's point, I think we would also have to address, if I was hearing Amy correctly, where instead of waiting till August, we would change it to where space would be made immediately for those families with a higher SES transferring into schools that can help balance that more. Is that correct?
I thought maybe Amy was going to jump in there. I think, yeah, some next steps, and Amy, you can add in some other dialogue here, but I think the next step would be we could bring those updated transfer forms reflecting the changes we suggested tonight and having some official action on it. I think like Ruthina said, if there's something else people would suggest. I know feedback we've had consistently from the secondary admin team, and there's some other voices out there, would be some general preference to close transfers and be a little bit more consistent like we are with elementary ones and hold maybe truer to some of our boundaries. Again, I think the board understands the complicating factors for us in that conversation are around the Alexander and Kirkwood attendance areas. And so that's kind of positioned us more towards the open transfer and having the buildings treated equitably. So I think a next step for us, we could bring back those forms, have you approve those if there's support to do so. And then we can move forward with that process and get it communicated out here well in advance of the March 1st deadline.
I'd also like just to follow up with Ruthina's conversation about maybe looking at demographic data too. If it's, I have no idea what it looks like, but if we could, if we could have some assurance that whatever we're doing is not going to change, it's not going to create demographic imbalances to any significant extent, to me that would be most helpful.
Sure, and we could try to gather some, like I said, some of the counts are smaller on that chart as you see, but we could also try to look at an aggregate form about the amount of transfers we have and some of the demographic splits we have in there. So we can work to see what kind of data we can bring back surrounding that, Charlie, when we bring those forms, and give you the best report out we can on that for sure.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. Thanks.
Yes, I recognize how much time and meetings and listening went into creating the relatively new transfer policy at the elementary level. But I've been asking for quite a while to really look at that secondary, because it's not the same at all of the secondary schools. And I think that's a piece that we need to address sooner than later, that it needs to be the same. So I will tell you that if we were just going to open it up, I don't know that anybody would have any problem with it if we just did that. So I think the question is, are folks more leaning towards closing it at all the secondary level? Because that would entail, a lot more information gathering, a lot more talking to people and really working out what that means. So I could see how that's a much longer conversation, but I do think we need to address sooner than later that they should all be the same. Or at least the 3 high schools should be the same as the 3 high schools. And that's the current state that they're not. And I would really like to figure that out sooner than later. And it's on our agenda tonight as a discussion point. So I guess I would discuss, I kind of have some of the same sense what Matt was alluding to, that the folks that have the means to work around the rules. The one way to counteract that is to make it even for everybody. So that's the thing that kind of leans me towards having it open at the secondary level across the board, which it already is everywhere but one school. So that's a fairly minor change, but that makes sense to me at this point in time. And so if we were to do that, like I said, I think that's an easier thing that we can do faster than if we went the other direction. So I don't know if anybody wants to kind of take a little bit of comment on that part, since we do have it as our discussion item tonight.
Thanks, Sean. This is Janet. I just wonder if we do open up a Liberty, since it's not been open for transfers, it's hard for us to judge, right, or know what the students that will request a transfer. And so but I'd love to hear people have thoughts on whether there's a point of view that if we open Liberty for transferring in, if we would see some shift in demographic balance between the high schools that's perhaps moving against or away from our equity goals around that midpoint that Amy was mentioning. And while I'm talking, I do support the change to the elementary transfer, Amy, that making it March 1st and just being very intentional and not saying only if there's space available. If we're really committed to balancing our schools, I think, making it part of the process for March makes sense, and factoring our school populations based on our goal around equity. So I do support that change on the elementary side, but I do wonder and worry a little if we open Liberty up, what would that do to our demographics at our high schools?
Yeah, that's, my concern. I don't know if there's any way that we'll be able to gauge that until we do it and see what happens. But I mean, I'd, be in favor of opening. I don't, I wouldn't suggest that we should close things down more than they are. So going with opening it up, I could support that. Like Ruthina, I'd like to see if there is going to be a community comment on that, although I guess to me, the comment people would have to be against that for some strong reasons. And I just, it could be that demographic shift, but I don't know how we would gauge that, until it actually happens. So I'd be in favor of moving forward with this next board meeting.
I mentioned now I'm losing track of dates. It was either at the last meeting or the one before that we're going to try and get back into our normal meeting cadence, where the first meeting of the month was a discussion meeting and the second meeting of the month was an action meeting. So we could certainly bring it back as an additional talking point at the next meeting, which would be the first one in November, with no intent to take action yet, but perhaps to take action in the second one in November, just to give people time to kind of weigh in on it and have us have another conversation after everybody's kind of digested the information a little bit.
Yeah, I like that plan, especially getting back to our normal action of how our board meeting works. If it's on the agenda, if we decide after next meeting that it will be an action item, that it will be on the second November meeting. I can endorse that.
And we could have that data ready for part of that conversation then about whatever data we can provide to you guys for that first November meeting. And then you'll have that ahead of any action you'll need to take. And I think Janet raises a good question. I think that one's hard to predict or know, kind of as JP responded there. I think what you'll see in the data right now is that it's, it's not very diverse in the amount of transfers we take into Liberty. It's more probably along the lines of what we had talked about with the families that can and are able to work within the system we have set up there to be able to access. And so you could look at that both ways. The one I outlined, that other families aren't accessing it because of that extra layer, and we'll see more families that potentially do, or we could say, well, now we've kind of opened it up and we even see more of what we currently have coming into Liberty. So I definitely think, it's a possibility to see either reaction. I think right now, though, as we look at playing field and being able to access campuses, we have set up a different kind of set of rules for that one campus, and without being able to really consider the close and stay consistent to our boundaries at all secondary campuses because of some elementary assignments, it seems like our most workable solution. So if I'm hearing the group right, we'll bring back data around what we currently have. You're going to do another conversation around at the first meeting in November, and then we'd be positioned to take action at the end of November, which would set us on a good timeline to communicate out and have plenty of time before March 1st.
Thank you. Can I ask one other question? Do we have any data on open enrollment from other districts requests to Liberty? Well, we've shut that down, I know. But because that's kind of compelling, students coming into the district. And so do we have any, but because it's been closed, maybe people haven't been requesting it. So.
Right. Word's kind of out now that it's closed or we won't accept it. And so a lot of those conversations may happen via phone, and we never receive those applications, as our assistants would take those calls and let them know that Liberty's not a choice, that they could apply to one of our other buildings. So they applied to the district. And then really we, if they're accepted, then we work within their school assignment or work for their school assignment. But oftentimes, obviously, we share with them that Liberty wouldn't be a possibility. So it'd probably be hard to get an accurate picture of that data because some of those requests are just never moved on then.
Yeah.
And also for part of the material that your team would be gathering, Matt, is it possible for you all to gather the last 2 academic years culture and climate surveys that was taken at each of the high schools? So City, West, and Liberty. So that I know that we have that data, but is that possible that that can be uploaded so we can have it all in one place while we're having this discussion?
The results from the climate and culture studies, Ruthina, is that what you're saying? You'd like to be part of that conversation? Sure. Mhm.
And not just for Liberty. I would like that
For the
information
update.
uploaded, yes, for City, West, and Liberty.
All right.
Just a question on that. Have we ever seen that data broken out by building?
I was just going to say, we never did that report in the fall to you guys with all the other pieces we had going on. So I was actually going to think about that a little bit more and figure out what the timing or what might make the most sense there to even do a more global perspective of that than just the high schools. But we can definitely have it for that transfer conversation. But there was a piece of that we did not come back to in the fall that we should have. And so I can work with the team too, or talk about that in agenda setting about what might make the most sense to bring that back. We know we have this recurring equity item, so there could be a good time for some conversation for that to fall into that too, JP. So that was the same thought I had, is that was a piece we bumped because of COVID that we could bring back.
All right. Matt, did you or any of the team have anything more to share on this topic?
That was all for us. So thanks for the conversation and questions. I think we know our marching orders. So.
All right. I think we are ready to move on to the next item, which is our return to learn update.
Sure. So thank you. We'll try to be brief here tonight, but we do want to spend some time sharing some survey results with you. You know that we conducted a survey out to the families the past week and also to our staff, just around some basic comfort level with where they're at in our different models. We asked the question in the framework of our metrics that if positivity rates were to go less than 5%, general comfort level on being able to return to a 5-day-a-week experience or to stay in the hybrid experience, or if they were anticipating a move to or from the online learning program. And so if Kristen, I'll give her a little lead time here. Maybe Kristen, if you could be willing to share your screen and we could walk through that portion of that results. We'll start with that this evening. And there she goes. She's quick. So she's got it up there. So you can go ahead and go into the next one right away.
Did you want me to go through this, Matt? I'm sorry, I didn't.
No, sorry. I just said you
there.
can go ahead and go to the next slide there, Kristen. Thank you. I'll walk through it. It's not moving on our screen if you're moving it.
And try again. About now.
I think we're on is this just the second slide? It looks like you're on slide 3. It says 3 of 7.
Yep, the participation numbers.
Okay.
How about that? Survey delivery. There you go.
Yep. Okay. So delivery of the survey and survey responses as far as completed, we had 1,700 of our employees, 1,762 high rate of response there from our employee group. And then close to a third or a little bit more than that of our parents, 6,147 parents. And so you can see the breakdown of about 3,395 parents of students in the hybrid model, parents of those in the PK-12 online learning program, 2,445. And then parents of students in both, we had some overlap of 307. And so that just gives you an idea of the participation level. You can go to the next one. And so overall learning model preference for the staff. And so when we look at the aggregated staff data, we saw that, again, I would just remind you, the way the question was worded, right? I mean, assuming that positivity rates, or if positivity rates were to go under that 5% threshold that we've outlined in our metrics, what would be the model preference or their comfort level about changing models or what model they'd like to exist in. And so here we see 20% or close to 21% are still saying 100%, or they're saying 100% on-site, closer to 62% remain in the hybrid model. And then the 100% off-site is right at 17% there, 16.9%. And so a pretty heavy majority of staff that their preference would be to remain in that hybrid model. And then for parents, when we look at the overall parent data set, you really kind of see it broken into some thirds here. 100% on-site would be the light shaded green there at the 37%, hybrid at 29.5%, and 100% off-site still carrying about 33%. But then what we'll do on the next two slides is break it down for you in the two models that they're currently existing in. And so parents currently in the hybrid learning model, you can see that 58% of them are feeling like they'd be ready for a 100% on-site experience. 37% or a little bit higher, closer to 38, would still want to remain in the hybrid model. And then a fraction of them, 4% there, are saying they're going to enroll their students in the online learning program. And then obviously the students and families that have chosen the PK-12 online learning program, we see some very different numbers come back from them, close to 70 or 72.3% plan to keep their students in the PK-12 online learning program. So we have a high number of parents that can plan to continue with that program for their students. Only about 9% of them would say at this point 100% on site, and then close to 19% talking about they'd be ready for a hybrid experience if rates got less than that 5% that we outlined from the beginning. And then so when we look at the online learning program and just breaks it down again, so 155 hybrid families indicate they intend to enroll their students in the PK-12 online learning program. We have about 1,800 families that say they indicate to keep their students enrolled in the program. And then on the other end, we have 725 that indicate they'd be comfortable moving from the PK-12 online learning program to either to 100% online model or the hybrid. And so you can kind of see our difference in the staffing switch we'll need to make here also at the trimester based on some switches we anticipate out of or into the online learning program. So with all of that said, knowing where our positivity rates have continued to be around that 5 to 6% range here in the last week or the last couple of weeks, and have been relatively low for the last several weeks, here we felt it was important to at least re-engage the parents and our staff in where their comfort level was. I think you'll see an additional parent engagement come from us to our families around the hybrid experience and some feedback in there. We know it's important to keep talking to them and to keep trying to learn and improve in that regard. But really, as we approach trimester 2, rates have not fallen below that 5% threshold yet where we'd feel comfortable starting trimester 2 in a different experience. And so we would plan to continue that hybrid experience as we move forward here. I think the change we would like to suggest and talk to you guys about a little bit is not waiting the whole trimester to consider a potential transition point. We've said in our metrics and matrix that transition of models to 100% on-site would only happen at the trimester. We would suggest trying to do a closer look at that at midterm for the second try. And so at least looking at that at midterm, and if we get some positive movement on our rates, consider potentially doing something different at that point. But until we would see those rates go below the 5%, as we've outlined in our metrics, we would plan to continue here to begin that trimester 2 in a hybrid format, and then do an earlier check-in rather than waiting all of trimester 2 to consider a model change. So that's kind of where we're at tonight. We wanted to make sure you saw that feedback, make sure we could address any questions about where we're going. We know that here after the meeting, we'll be asking parents to make a choice or elect their choice for trimester 2. And so we wanted to have as much of that information presented and out there, and also give an indication about how we plan to begin trimester 2. So questions or feedback on that portion, we'd be happy to talk through that. And then we do have a health and safety item to address around return to learn too. But we can take those questions first about any model conversation you might want to have.
So, Sean, this is Charlie. Matt, do you have an idea of how many participants in the survey were non-English language speakers? It was offered in five languages besides English. Do you have a way of telling how many responded in one of those languages?
I do not believe we do, Charlie, because we didn't ask for that when they completed the survey. But Kristen, I mean, is there any information you'd have to conflict with that? But I don't believe we have that information.
Yeah, Charlie, I don't have those numbers pulled, but I am able to pull data on how many people took the survey in a language other than English. That's something I can definitely pull at some point. I just don't have the numbers right off the top of my head.
Okay, I didn't expect you'd have them tonight since we hadn't asked for them, but I think that would be helpful information for us as we process this.
I really appreciate wanting to consider the midterm as a earlier transition point. I'm really, looking to see how the winter goes and, how things fall out through cold and flu season. And if things are picking up, I think it makes sense to really look at making that transition sooner than at the end of second trimester.
Matt, if we did a mid-trimester change, would the only change be bringing our standard enrollment students back to 100% on-site, or would we also allow the online program enrolled people to make a shift in their enrollment status?
So online program students, online learning program students, we're still asking for a trimester commitment from them. And so it's really, if you're signing up for the continuum, that's what we want people to be informed of, whether that's the district's in a fully online experience at that point, we're in a hybrid, or we're in a 100% environment. And so that's the continuum choice. And so you're right, Lisa, to think about that question, but those students would be electing a choice for the whole trimester to stay in the online learning program. And that's, really in a huge driver. And I know you guys understand that from the amount of conversations we have, is just the staffing alignment of that. There's no way we could realign staff midstream in that regard with the big influx of students from an online learning program. So we need them to set that selection so we can set courses and schedules and teaching staff aligned.
This is Janet. Thanks, Matt, for walking through that. I support the midterm approach as well. Just want to make sure that teachers, staff would be comfortable in making that switch from hybrid to fully 100%. At the midterm, I think just making sure folks have enough time to make that adjustment and plan for it. And if teachers, staff, paras, all the folks supporting our students in the building are comfortable with a midterm approach, I'm good with it.
Thanks for that. And of course, that's something we'll continue to work with them on. And it's hard to forecast or predict, any of what that looks like. But we did think that was a stretch of time that would be good to look at it again. So thank you.
On that kind of similar thought, Matt, I know the survey there was broken down for the parents by ones that are currently sending their kids into the schools in the hybrid program versus the fully online. I'm just kind of curious as to how the breakdown of staff and their voting went, both by folks that are working in the buildings or doing online. I know there's a bunch that are doing both. And I'm looking at teachers and paras and nutrition and janitorial and all of the different categories, just to see if that's skewed, in one of those kind of employee groups versus another, or environment versus another. I think that's good information to have. I have some other thoughts on how we move forward, but I might keep it. If you've got a little bit more on the return to learn, I might come back with that in a little bit.
Sorry, Sean, I more on that point to address your question, or you meant on a different item with
on a different topic.
Okay. Yep.
So Matt, just so I understand what you're contemplating here, you're looking at the midpoint in the second trimester of offering students the opportunity to do both totally on-site learning and remain or remain in online learning?
No, sorry, let me
No.
say that again. And so really students, what we're approaching here is that families need to again make that choice about which option they would like to pursue for second trimester. And so one option is to enroll into our standard option is what we're referring to it as, which is the continuum of options. And that means whatever we're making a decision at the time according to our metrics for our provision of school looks like. Is that an online experience? Is that a hybrid experience? Or is that 100% offsite? Primarily for this trimester, we've been in a hybrid experience. The other choice families could make approaching second trimester is to commit to a fully online experience for Tri-2. So those students would stay fully online for all of trimester 2, Charlie. What I'm suggesting here is that for the continuum option or the standard enrollment option that families would choose, instead of saying we're either in hybrid for the whole trimester or online for a portion of that trimester, we would consider 100% enrollment potentially at the midterm, 100% on site. That is something that's stipulated in our metrics right now that we wouldn't consider until the trimester, that we would only consider 100% 5 days a week at the turn of a trimester. And so for us, we think we probably need to bump that time up and look at a midterm conversation around that. Of course, it would have to be supported by the health data to make a decision like that to bring people back 100% on site. So I hope I helped clarify it there and didn't further confuse you.
Well, so parents would not have a 100% on-site or hybrid choice. Is that right? To be
No, that's
either
the
or.
thing where we've really kind of held that decision making part at the district level about if we're doing 100% off on-site or if we're doing hybrid model or if we've asked the state for permission to be on an online experience. And so that's the continuum, and we've set out those metrics to guide our continuum decision making. So parents don't really just have the autonomy of that choice. They're dependent upon our decision here as a district about what model we're offering at that point in time. What we're saying is we'll take a look at it sooner than what we would have traditionally said in our metrics.
Okay, and then so you're still, as I understand it, going to guide, or we're going to guide our decisions about 100% on-site or hybrid based upon the safety metrics as
Yep.
best we could understand them.
Right.
All right, man, I think you said you had another piece that return to learn that you wanted to talk about. So why don't we go ahead and do that, and then we'll open it back up for questions.
Sure. And so I'll give Chase an opportunity here if he wants to say anything before. I know Kate has some information to report back to you from the health and safety team, but really what this topic involves is around the new CDC recommendations around quarantining and the shortened time frame that you can be considered to be in close contact with somebody and how that will affect our quarantining and contact tracing protocols. So Chase, if you have anything before, otherwise I know Kate has some information to share back with y'all.
No, I really don't. Good evening, everybody, but I haven't really spoken tonight. So I'll just say hello, and then I'll give Kate a huge kudos. Things continue to change, as we know, the guidance, and this is no exception. Last week, new guidance came down midweek, and Kate jumped into action along with Dwayne and pulled the health and safety committee together. So just really appreciate them being able to be nimble and do work in a timely fashion so we can keep the community and, of course, the board updated on where we are. So Kate, do you want to share kind of where we're headed?
Sure, absolutely. Chase, thank you very much. Dwayne and I did meet with the Health and Safety Committee yesterday, and our focus was really looking at the differing definitions of close contacts between the CDC and also the Iowa Department of Public Health, and making a recommendation for the district on which guidelines we felt the district should be following. And if you're not familiar with the differing guidelines that we have right now, the CDC changed their definition of close contact on the 21st of October to include somebody who's a close contact as someone who is within 6 feet of an infected person for a cumulative total of 15 minutes or more over a 24-hour period. And then also indicated that differential determination of close contact for those using fabric face coverings is not recommended. So those are the CDC guidelines. The Iowa Department of Public Health defines an individual as a close contact when they've been within 6 feet of a COVID-19 positive individual for 15 minutes. And they were no longer recommending a quarantine if a potential exposure occurs while both the infectious individual and the close contact are wearing face coverings. So what we do know is that after a meeting yesterday, that we suspect that the Iowa Department of Public Health will be changing their guidelines to match the CDC guidelines definition of a close contact, really looking at the cumulative minutes instead of consecutive minutes. So then the difference that will take place between those two guidelines is really the issue of wearing a mask and whether it negates the need of a close contact needing to be in quarantine. So that was what our Health and Safety Committee discussed quite a bit yesterday. And we are recommending the following. We're recommending that we continue to follow CDC guidelines. They have been our main resource to guide ICCSD health and safety protocols. You know, we often get a lot of new information, research, studies throughout the pandemic, and we have found the research is properly vetted through the CDC. Johnson County Public Health also believes Iowa City is a bit of an anomaly. The mitigation strategies that we are employing seem to be working, and they encouraged us to continue doing what we are doing. The teachers union supports following the CDC guidelines. Also in our conversations, we noted that COVID numbers are increasing across the state. Communities are experiencing COVID fatigue. Flu season is ahead of us. The weather is really limiting our outdoor use at this time. So the committee believes we really need to continue thoughtful adherence to mitigation techniques. In addition, the health and safety team is concerned about making decisions about exposure based on wearing a mask. It's difficult to ensure successful mask wearing of minor children. And schools provide their own unique environment. Students participate in higher risk activities like PE, music, singing. They remove masks for mask breaks to eat breakfast and to eat lunch. So making quarantine decisions solely on mask wearing really negates that need for a layered approach also to mitigation strategies. So we really know that there's not one strategy in and of itself that is successful, and that we need to follow CDC guidelines and employ, you know, the multiple mitigation techniques like hand washing, cleaning, disinfecting, social distancing, prohibiting shared materials, mask wearing, as well as others. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
I don't have a question. I just appreciate that recommendation, and I agree that we should follow CDC.
Agreed. Thanks, Kate.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too, Kate. Yeah. And I really appreciate the health and safety people paints going into this in such detail. So I appreciate that.
All right. Yeah, I do. I appreciate the recommendation. I think about in a high school with all the kids moving around, I'm trying to figure out how you wouldn't have a cumulative 15 minutes with every single other person in a high school. Or at least a whole grade. That's concerning. So Matt, do you guys have more to share?
No, I was just going to say, those were our two big items for this evening around return to learn. So I know you said you had maybe one other thing to come back to. So
Yeah, and I guess I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit, and it's maybe kind of teeing you up for the next meeting as opposed to tonight necessarily. But, all this talk is, how are we going to be, physically in our spaces? Are we still going to be in a hybrid, or when are we going to potentially do something different? And the bottom line, those are very important decisions, and we have to, satisfy the health and safety needs of everyone. And that's what we've been talking about for the last 7 months is how we can best do that. So chances are we are not going to have 100% of our kids in a building like it was 7 months ago anytime soon. So the question I would then ask is, what can we do to help the learning part of our students, right? Because as we sit there and think, we've got to get kids back in school because it's easier for, it's easier for families. It's easier to actually teach them. They'll have better outcome. We know those things are true when you're in person, but it's not going to happen soon. So how can we think differently about how we're providing our education, both in the classroom on those days and outside of the classroom if they're not there, to try and mitigate some of those problems? We're not going to fix everything, and this isn't going to last forever, and we're going to have great gains once we're done. But in the short term, I do think we need to try and think outside the box and really come up with some different ideas on how we can, help all of our students still do well, both, reading and math and things like that, but also that social emotional learning that they're, not getting as they're not with all of their peers. So that's I want to focus the return to learn on the learn part. That's what we've kind of been hearing from both teachers and families who understand what we're doing, but are still struggling with it. And I think that's a very real question that we should try and answer is, yes, we're going to do safety first. While that is happening, what other things can we be doing to help things out? And so you're all welcome to jump in on that tonight, but I'm mostly kind of throwing it out there as things we should be talking about in future updates.
Sorry. I was also going to add that in addition to what Sean said, do we have any data on how students are doing, like students who are taking advantage of the continuum and those who are doing 100% online? Do we have any data on the gaps, like the learning gaps related to these two sets of students?
You mean a comparison, Dromi, from online students and to students in our continuum model, what you'd be looking for? Sure. Yeah, so I think a couple of things we could come back with next time, and we can get into some of this conversation this evening if you'd like to, but I think for our team, it might be helpful to organize some of those things. And the thing I'd say is this is a question we ask ourselves every day, right? And I think this is the work that's going on with our admin teams. This is the work that the admin team takes back and does with their leadership team, with teachers in the building, and that teachers are trying to do in their classrooms every day, is looking for new and innovative ways to engage students, questioning their own grading practices, trying to make constant contacts home to see how kids are doing and engaged, and if they can be doing something different or innovative in that approach. And so this is the work that we're underway with this fall, and the work we're involved with. And that takes some data analysis on our end, like you guys are speaking to, whether it's failure rates at the secondary level and looking at course completion and credit, since we know credit acquisition is a huge component of their experience in being able to acquire a high school diploma, or elementary and proficiency rates, and looking at some of that data. And so we could certainly put that together in a format next week to kind of have that be the focus of our conversation. I think Sean's right. We've spent a lot of time talking on the health and safety with you guys, but our work is a learning organization, and that's what we do every day. And that's the question and the work that our teammates are underway with right now. And so whether that's looking at the data, I think like Dromi's talking about, any kind of comparison data, even our comparison data from last fall to this fall, I think helps inform, what kind of happened in the spring and what we're up against as we move forward. And then also, like I said, and we really refer to them as like MTSS efforts, right? The multi-tier system of supports, and what are those system of supports, and how have they had to change this year, knowing that we're delivering education in a different and less than ideal format. So unless you guys have specifics on that tonight, I think it would be a more robust conversation if we go back and plan and prepare for that, and kind of give you the menu of the different things we're doing, and also maybe potentially some of the feedback we're seeking, and then potential changes you might see even for try two, or things that we know people are trying to learn from and improve on.
I don't really specifically have anything else, but I just want to encourage all of us, including the administration team, that if the data comes back and we do find gaps, then as we go about our daily activities, we should think about ways that we can help the kids. I don't know if there's like a set solution, but I think that everybody can think about ways, I don't know, partner with churches, whatever it is that we can do to help kids who are struggling. Because I know that this time some parents are still at home and not working, and not going physically to work. And so they also have their kids at home, and how they have to manage that and make sure their kids are doing what they need to do becomes a struggle. So if we can think about ways that we can help the kids who are struggling, that will be helpful.
Certainly.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that, Drami. Matt, I'm wondering, one of the things I heard from talking with a teacher recently was that they generally thought that maybe if this was a second grade teacher, they thought that maybe a third of their class who were in the hybrid model were not able to participate very well, were not able to engage, basically because they didn't understand, one, how to connect their home device or the device they were using at home, Chromebooks or whatever it was, or they didn't understand how to use the software once they got it connected. And I'm wondering, can you say if what we're doing in terms of training? No, it's not necessarily a good word to use for second grade students, but to orienting lower grade students to how to use the devices, how to use the software, and perhaps even trying to get their parents to come in and some suitable situation, and also help them to understand, so that the ability to do online learning in the days you're not in school is really preserved, or is enhanced. I'm sorry.
Sure. So I don't know if you're asking, Charlie, for us to talk about what we've done or to consider that in the future. I think one thing that we know we need to continue to do in the future is to engage with the parents and to try to support that in different ways. And I think that's something the team has talked about here recently is, if we still have some of that access problem, maybe we have the internet and we have the device, but there's still trouble navigating the links and some of that. I think there's some things we can do on the district level, but I think that's a shared approach, right? I mean, there's communications we can do out and trainings we can do, but I think that's also, that's where our building administrators come in and help about the orientations they've tried to provide to parents and the support they've tried to provide. That's where classroom teachers have continued to try to reach out to families and help them and set up those classroom experiences and make sure they're getting the links and the access that they need, or then calling on their administrative team when they do need that help and support. And so it's really kind of that tiered approach. And, we're not saying we're doing it perfect on every one of those levels, but I think that's the way we have to attack it, because when we're having that problem down to the classroom and student and teacher level, a blanket solution from the system is only going to provide so much. And so we have to think about, what do we do to try to give people the general information, the access, and the best support we can, and that they know where to go to if it's not working. And then how do we continue to complement that from the building and then ultimately the classroom level. And so that's where I'm saying, I think we're trying to look for those continual improvements and to know where we make those for trimester 2, that students get off to a fresh start and a positive start in that experience. Because if we're still having that experience on October 27th, where kids cannot connect, or they're not accessing the class because they're saying they don't understand or can't access it, that's a problem. And that's a problem we have to correct because we've missed a significant part of the school year at this point. And so we'd want to know that. We'd want those teachers reaching out to their building administrators, and we'd want to be trying to tier that support from the district level on down.
Yeah, and I'm speaking from from my experience as a a desktop workstation support person from quite a long time ago at the hospitals. Where basically, you provide software or machines to staff and give them general instructions as you suggested, but then you have to sit down with them basically side by side and say, this is how you do this, this is how you do this, this is how you do this. And they learn that way. And then they become very adept at using whatever you're generally providing to them for access and learning. So
right, and that's, if it's a technical problem, that's what our help desk will do. That's what our help desk is there to do, and they'll contact they can contact the district help desk, and Adam's kind of walked through that with you guys before. And then if it's a classroom specific issue, that's where I'm saying, I think as far as a shared and teaming approach to do that and try to make those connections and make sure the students are logged in and getting connected. And so we can build that in, I think next week too, to some of the tiers of support and some of those things we need to continue to look at. Cause you're right. I mean, sometimes it just takes being able to sit down and do that with the family or with the student that's having problems getting in there consistently or getting access to the course consistently.
Okay, thanks very much.
And I would say, Lisa can jump in because she was there too when we were discussing at the Nests update meeting yesterday that they were looking at, having people come in to train the folks that are working there on how to use Seesaw and Canvas and all those things. And they were wondering about the possibility of, making videos of those trainings so they can disseminate that across the Nest groups. But somebody did ask the question if that was something that could be then shared with parents who are also kind of struggling to help their kids do that sort of thing. So that's one thing that they brought up. And they were asking, what can we do together as a partnership with them to kind of think outside the box to really help the kids succeed. So I'd throw that out there as well. So they're kind of looking at it from their angle, very similar to what Charlie was kind of asking about. So.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback, Sean. I think that's an idea that would kind of fit into those layers of support I was talking about. And that would be something from the district level, obviously we could provide, or that we could look at doing as far as, what are those how-to videos we have. I know Adam's already got a great collection of things and resources that some teachers have pulled together. And so whatever we have existing and then whatever additional we would need to pull together to do. So certainly we can continue to work on that end.
And then I think the next further step, right, is not just, making sure the adults have what they need, because, you may have some students that don't have the adults there to help them. So how can we take that one step further, make sure that, everybody is getting their needs met, and that, one size is not going to fit all here for sure. So I think we got a lot to do. And I wanted to bring this up because I do think this is a bigger conversation and we can have a really robust one next week, I think. But I want to make sure that I wasn't insinuating that people aren't worried about this stuff or aren't doing the work here, because I know you are. We just haven't talked about it, right, in this format. We've talked a lot about our health and safety steps and, whether we're going to school or not. So this is the stuff I think we really need to bring to the forefront. And even just to kind of bounce it all off each other, right? To hear what we are doing and what's working and what's not. So I appreciate starting the conversation tonight and look forward to continuing it.
Yeah, I just want to chime in to pick up where Sean left off and just say that I know that a lot of this work is going on behind the scenes, and that the teachers are on it and the building admins are on it. Again, like teacher wife perspective, the ILT meetings are happening and they're meeting and these conversations are going on in the buildings. And so I just want the admin team to know that I don't think that the tone is why isn't it happening, because I at least know that this is happening, and I appreciate everyone's efforts on that.
This is Brady. I'll jump in. Yeah, and Sean, Lisa, I appreciate both of that and the other questions from the board. And that I didn't take it at all in any way except that let's have a conversation about teaching and learning, because that's what we're here ultimately to do. So absolutely understood the tenor and the context and the questions, and appreciate everybody's continued support. And it is nice to have some stability with some of those decisions by having the metrics and having that, then I think we can turn our collective attention to some of those conversations that sometimes we just don't have the time or energy for. So yeah, there's a lot of work being done up and down the system, and I think it'll be good to bring that back. But no, I didn't, as a teacher on the panel here, I didn't at all interpret it like, why aren't you guys doing more? I mean, I understood fully what we were asking.
And I should say that I heard yesterday, had a very brief conversation with a parent that I've talked to over the summer. And when school started, who was having a lot of difficulty getting connected. And she said that actually they're doing very nicely now. And I think that's in large part because of the efforts of the staff at the school they're attending, as well as the IT folks here too. So that's one example, but it's a really good one.
Sure. I think it's all about shared understanding. I mean, that's what, I think we're taking from this is what is the work going on, right? And so making sure we have a shared understanding of the work going on and then continuing to look for opportunities to improve. As a system, we're not doing our job if we're not looking to try to get better, but we're very thankful for your comments and support and then the commitment of our staff to continue to try to do that. And so it's just on us, and especially in this situation, more urgent than ever to continue to look for those ways and make sure we have a shared understanding about what is happening, what could be happening, what opportunities are out there. So I think that's good conversation for us to continue to shift to, since we know at least it seems like there's some stability in our model conversation right now. And then, as we continue this in an ongoing dialogue, it's really looking at that support. So we'll be ready to go with that. Thank you so much.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments from directors this time? All right. Again, I really look forward to furthering that conversation. But for now, we can move on to our agenda setting for that next board meeting. Obviously, we have our normal stuff. It is the first meeting of the month, so we'll have our student reps back, an ICA update and our consent. We do have our quarterly financial report on there. I did ask us to kind of revisit our own legislative priorities, not just the ones we submit to ISB, but our own district ones that we want to put together to, we have put together a nice little pamphlet usually that we can use to take to Des Moines with us. So I'd like to at least start that conversation. Obviously, we just had a conversation about what we want to see in Return to Learn. We will know what we'll have, but we may very well, or probably will have an equity discussion item, just to kind of see where we're at with some of those next steps. And then I wanted to make sure I wrote down that we were going to add back on the a transfer discussion, hopefully to get some demographic info and potentially climate and culture information to go in with that. We do have a few other things that are on hold a little bit until we we looked at creating a facilities subcommittee, and I think we're going to look at putting that together at our organizational meeting along with all the other random committees that we have, which I think would happen at the second meeting in November. So some of those things that we've had kind of on the back burner as conversation items will get put to that committee in a couple different meetings or a couple meetings from now. So in the short term, did I cover everything we needed for the 10th? Is there anything else that people needed to add to that or would like to see added to that or other meetings?
The only thing I wanted to bring up about the meeting on the 10th was just see if there was any way that maybe we could start at 4:30. The ISBA Equity Pre-Conference workshop, it starts at 6 o'clock that night. And if I'm the only one registered for it, then I just don't know how many people have signed up for the conference. But given that equity was such an important focus of our work this year, I wanted to make sure to make it to the equity conference because I think there'll be some good stuff out there. But like I said, if I'm the only one going, it's all on Zoom. So I will just sign off of the school board Zoom at 5:59 and you all can continue the work without me.
Kim, do you know, as far as I know, Lisa was the only one signed up for the pre-conference thing, but maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, sorry, I am too.
Yeah,
Okay.
Jeremy is too, yeah.
Okay. Is 4:30 a possibility? I know, we have classes going on till 4 at our secondary locations, but nobody has to go a whole lot of distance here. I'm open to it, but I'm looking around at other heads and not really.
4:30 works for me. It's fine.
Yeah, I can be okay with that. I just want to just raise the point that, we have been meeting at 5 o'clock, I think, for everyone's convenience. But generally speaking, and we've had great attendance, I think, because of interest. But, oftentimes if folks do want to see our meetings, when we push it earlier, we are sort of making it harder for working folks to be able to get anywhere and log in. So just, I'm certainly okay with this. I agree. I think that I've been very happy with all of the IASB content. So the more our folks are taking that in, I support that. But I just want to kind of put a warning out there that we've been making these earlier, and it might be a hindrance for some folks who have to work.
Guess maybe I'll ask it this way. Are there folks out there who feel strongly that we should leave the time alone? Kind of looking more at the administrative side at this point.
Oh, sorry, Sean. No, we'll make it work. We'll be fine with 4:30. One thing I did want to put on your radar that we'd like to probably do at that first November meeting are those teach and learning annual reports that got bumped from the fall. And so we'd be ready to present those. I know we're kind of getting a long agenda there, but we do have those ready to go and would like to deliver those.
And I'm sorry, just something to think about. Since going back to not Sean, the other guy, JP's point, I'm sorry, I'm like the other one. Since we are starting a half an hour early, and we do have quite a few people that not only work within our district, but they work jobs that some of them aren't available until right at 5. But maybe there's a thought of adding community comment. We do a half an hour or a little bit at the beginning and add some at the end or right before we talk about the discussion piece. That's the transfer item, because we're putting that out there that we're going to have that. And if we now change the time, that's my only concern with what JP, I keep wanting to call you Sean, with JP mentioned that I don't want people to look at that as an attempt of us to silence them being able to share their thoughts at the meeting.
So I was going to say, since we've already put that out there, I don't know if it's still okay to do it at 5, and then we can leave at, I guess, 1 minute to 6, whatever it is. But it's already out there, and so changing it, I don't know if it's going to work, but we can still talk about it.
I mean, I personally, I think we probably could leave it at 5. We're not planning on taking any action at the meeting, so I don't know that we need the full complement for votes. Obviously, we want to have your voices heard as part of conversations, so we don't want to shortchange you there. But I think that is a valid concern to move it earlier, kind of a last minute thing. So I guess I've kind of gone the other way, and I would propose we leave it at 5. I was debating whether or not tonight to revisit the idea of when and if we would return to in-person at 6 o'clock at some point, even a small group. So I'll just throw that out there to let you mill about in your brains a little bit. We won't do it next week for sure, or next meeting. So I think we're probably better off leaving it at 5 to not complicate matters any more than they're already complicated. All right. And added teaching and learning annual reports. Was there anything else to add to it?
That's it for right now. That would be the one we'd want on there. And so if we frame them as teach and learning reports, and then we'll work to have those ready to go. I would say just the other general thing is we're working on a report schedule, an amended report schedule to bring back to you guys to make sure we can get back on track with some of those delivered reports. And so the team's working right now to structure something out, and then we'll have that ready to go and make sure we meet those requirements for the end of the year.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Is there any further last second comments by anybody? All right, I would entertain a motion to adjourn then.
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, thank everyone for your time. We'll see you next time.
Take care.